A start on this small drawing of a kingfisher in coloured pencil. I'm using Faber Castell's Polychromos pencils, which are an oil-based colour pencil, which means that they're nice and firm in texture. You can get a good point on them when they're sharp, and they also have a very good range of 120 colours. The surface I'm working on is De La Rowney's Linen Washboard, which essentially is a hot pressed, in other words very smooth, watercolour paper bonded onto a board backing. This makes the surface and the board itself much more resilient, and you can build up lots of really deep and rich colours by using it. Now in this section of video I'm going to focus on just the beak and the eye, and I've started the process of putting in the colour and detail on the beak using my coal grey pencil number 4. It's a sort of mid-tone which allows us to begin to build the base on the darker areas of the bill. The shape of the bill is going to, or the beak is going to create variations in these colours because there'll be some shadows, there'll be some highlights. So I'm starting out by delineating where some of the darker passages of colour will be. Once those lines are in place, I begin to work with the black pencil. But even with this very dark pencil, I'm still building up the depth of tone by multiple strokes. And you'll see me stop and go back, almost rehearse the stroke while I'm working. And by building it up slowly like this, it gives you an opportunity to get some subtlety into the tone, but also as you pass back over an area again, if one of the lines you made perhaps has wandered a bit from the path that you wanted it to take, you can adjust it as you go. So there's a double advantage to being patient and building up the darker areas with multiple layers. And it's very useful, especially on something as complex as a beak like this, if you have access to lots of photos of your chosen bird, and ideally photos from a variety of different angles. What you then get is an opportunity to see just how the shape of the bill changes on various parts of it. So you begin to understand what it is that you're trying to depict. It's not just a case of filling in an accurate pattern of colours. It's about trying to build an illusion that what you're drawing has 3 dimensions to it. And now we're starting to get that feel as we've introduced 2 different pencils and changed the pressure and the level of tone of those pencils in various different points on the beak. Now what I'm having to do to a large extent on this surface, which I didn't have to do on any of the other videos where you've seen me working in coloured pencil, but working on a surface like Sennelier's Pastel Card or Clairefontaine's Pastel Matte, when I work on those surfaces they are fairly coarse in texture, and that gives an advantage that you can apply light over dark. On a surface as smooth as this, that's almost impossible. You can reduce the tone a little bit by going over with a softer white pencil. But as for putting white detail in, it's almost impossible. So you can see I'm leaving the areas that I want to be particularly well lit and appear paler. I'm leaving them so that the surface of the board shows through. And that requires a little bit of thought ahead of actually making your marks. And again, good reference will show you where those paler areas need to be so that you can avoid them. You might say, given that the lack of texture has effectively made more work by having to think more clearly about where the paler areas are going to be, why am I using this and not one of the pastel surfaces where I could add my white pencil wherever I wanted it? And the reason for that is that I find that the coarser surfaces that are made for pastel are wonderful for coloured pencil if your subject matter is an animal, in other words, has fur rather than feathers. You can accommodate a certain degree of indistinct lines, if you like, when you're applying the colour pencil onto those pastel surfaces. There's a little bit of breakup because the coarse surface will take more colour pencil from the tip of the pencil itself, and getting really tight, clean, clearly distinct lines such as you would need on the section that we're doing now on the beak of this Kingfisher, getting those lines is very difficult, and the smaller the composition and the tighter the area within which you're working, the more difficult it is to make it really crisp and sharp. Whereas this beautiful smooth watercolour board allows me to be in control of the pencil. Now, as you watch this and see me applying the colour pencil to this surface, and I'm using a white pencil now, as I mentioned just now, just to lighten very slightly some of the grey areas I put in. But as you see me working on this, if you're watching on your desktop or laptop where you have quite a large screen, the image that you're watching will be quite appreciably bigger than the original drawing that I'm working on, which means that as you watch it, the marks that I'm making will seem less distinct, much fuzzier, essentially because that drawing is spread over a much larger area on that computer screen than it actually occupied on the paper, and that means the resolution drops dramatically and it looks less clear. If you find that's a bit distracting, then reduce your screen size, or perhaps if you have a tablet, you could watch it on that. Smaller screen will allow you to see an image that's much closer to the original size of the drawing, and therefore the detail will look much tighter and much more like the original. So I did use the white pencil a little bit, and you can see the sort of smoothing effect that has had. It's dropped the tone of the grey pencil a little bit, but at the same time it's helped to blend it. And the beak itself is a hard surface. We want a slightly different textural impression when we complete those sort of areas of the bird than we do when we're drawing the feathers. So blending like that is a good way of merging the colours, making what you've just drawn appear to be very smooth, and the highlights will also appear to give that impression too. Now on the eye, I've started off using my black pencil, and now I've come in with the brown one, the Bistre. This particular colour works over the top of the black, because what I'm looking for is a very dark brown tone to the iris. You almost can't see the difference between that and black, but it's very, very subtle. And any bird that you see that appears on at first glance to have a black, totally black eye, that's not the case. It will always have a different colour on the iris, but in some birds such as this Kingfisher, it's a very dark colour, and that means it's not immediately obvious. But I still want a suggestion of that brown. And you can see I've left the top crescent on the eye clear so the paper shows through to create the highlight. But we've got a central spot there, which is the paper colour, it's bright white. But to either side of it, as I'm drawing now, we've got an extra highlight. And the reason for that is that the eye's surface is convex. In other words, it's more like a marble than a flat disc. It's got a curved surface, and the light that hits it will hit it at different degrees depending upon what part of that surface is pointing directly towards the light and what parts are actually sloping away. So if you put a crescent highlight in, as I've done here, that gives more of a suggestion that that eye is curved in nature. So gradually I work over these areas. You can see I'm changing the outline of that eye very slightly, just to tidy it up and to finish off this stage of the drawing. We can come back in the latter stages and refine details, but for now we're ready to move on to the next stage and to start depicting some of the feather detail on the bird's head.